Rosa had been working for the Richardson family for almost 3 years now. Every morning at 7 sharp, she would unlock the front door of their beautiful house in the hills and begin her day. The house was huge, with white marble floors that sparkled in the sunlight and windows so big they looked like they belonged in a magazine. Mrs. Victoria Richardson was different from other rich people Rosa had worked for. She always said good morning with a real smile, asked about Rosa's daughter Maria, and never made her feel small or invisible. Victoria owned a computer company that made millions of dollars, but she still remembered Rosa's birthday and gave her time off when Maria was sick. Mr. Charles Richardson seemed like the perfect husband. He was tall and handsome, always wearing expensive suits that fit him perfectly. Rosa often saw him bringing Victoria flowers or chocolates, kissing her cheek when he left for work. He worked at a big bank downtown and drove a shiny black car that probably cost more than Rosa made in 5 years. At first, Rosa thought they had the perfect marriage. Charles would tell Victoria how beautiful she looked every morning, help her with her code, and talk about their weekend plans. He seemed to care about everything Victoria did with her business. Sometimes Rosa would catch him asking detailed questions about Victoria's work meetings or which clients she was meeting with. But after working in their house for so long, Rosa started noticing small things that felt wrong, like how Charles would suddenly stop talking on the phone when Victoria walked into the room, or how he would quickly close his laptop if his wife came home unexpectedly. Rosa tried to ignore these moments, telling herself it was none of her business. One Tuesday morning, Rosa was cleaning the living room when Charles's phone rang. He answered it in his usual cheerful voice, but when he saw Victoria's car pulling into the driveway, his whole face changed. He quickly said something about calling back later and hung up. When Victoria walked in a minute later, Charles was all smiles again, acting like nothing had happened. Rosa felt a cold feeling in her stomach, but she kept dusting the furniture and pretending she hadn't noticed anything. The strange phone calls became more frequent. Rosa would be vacuuming upstairs and hear Charles talking in hushed, serious tones. She couldn't make out the words, but something about his voice made her skin crawl. It was nothing like the warm, loving voice he used with Victoria. Then Rosa started noticing Charles going through Victoria's things. When Victoria traveled for business, which happened at least twice a month, Charles would spend hours in her home office. Rosa would see him looking through papers on Victoria's desk, checking her computer, and even going through her purse when she left it on the kitchen counter. Rosa's heart would race every time she caught him doing this. Charles always had an excuse ready. He was looking for a phone number Victoria had written down, or he needed to check their joint bank account, or he was planning a surprise for their anniversary. His explanations always sounded reasonable, but something felt wrong about the way he acted when he thought no one was watching. The worst part was how Charles's face would change when Victoria wasn't around. The loving smile would disappear completely, replaced by something cold and calculating. Rosa had seen that same look on her ex-husband's face right before he emptied their bank account and left her with nothing. Rosa tried to convince herself she was imagining things. Charles Richardson was a successful banker, a respected man in the community. Victoria clearly loved him, and he seemed to love her back. Who was Rosa to think bad thoughts about her employer's marriage? She was just a housekeeper trying to keep her job and support her daughter. But Rosa couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had grown up in a neighborhood where you learned to trust your instincts about people. Her grandmother always said that when your gut tells you someone is dangerous, you better listen. And Rosa's gut was screaming warnings about Charles Richardson. Victoria had been so good to Rosa's family. When Maria needed surgery last year, Victoria not only gave Rosa time off but also helped pay for the medical bills. She said Rosa was like family, and family helps family. Victoria even attended Maria's graduation from high school, sitting in the audience and clapping like a proud aunt. This kindness made Rosa feel protective of Victoria. But Rosa's immigration papers were still being processed, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. Her lawyer had warned her to avoid any trouble or conflicts that might hurt her chances of staying in the country legally. One complaint from the Richardsons could destroy everything Rosa had worked for. Still, Rosa found herself paying closer attention to Charles's behavior. She noticed he asked a lot of questions about Victoria's business schedule. He always wanted to know exactly when she would be home, who she was meeting with, and how long her trips would last. At first, Rosa thought he was just being a caring husband, But now these questions felt different. Charles also started asking Rosa strange questions about the house security system, about which doors had cameras, and about her cleaning schedule. He wanted to know exactly when Rosa arrived and left each day. When Rosa asked why, Charles laughed and said he was just trying to make sure everyone felt safe and secure. But Rosa didn't feel safe. Every day, the feeling grew stronger that Charles Richardson was not the man he pretended to be. Victoria trusted him completely, shared everything with him, and had no idea that her perfect husband might be planning something terrible. Rosa knew she had to be careful. She couldn't make accusations without proof, and she couldn't risk her family's future on a feeling. But she also couldn't ignore what her instincts were telling her. Something bad was coming, and Victoria had no idea she was in danger. As Rosa locked up the Richardson house that evening, she made a decision. She would start paying even closer attention to Charles. If he was up to something, she would find out what it was. Victoria had protected Rosa's family when they needed help. Now it might be Rosa's turn to protect Victoria, even if it meant risking everything she had worked so hard to build. Rosa's hands were shaking as she cleaned Charles's office that Thursday morning. Victoria had left for a 3-day business trip to San Francisco, and Charles had gone to work earlier than usual. Rosa usually saved his office for last because she didn't like being in there. But today she forced herself to clean it thoroughly. The office was Charles's private space, filled with banking awards and expensive leather furniture. Rosa was dusting his desk when she accidentally knocked over a stack of papers with her elbow. The papers scattered across the floor, and as Rosa bent down to pick them up, her blood turned to ice. The top paper was a life insurance policy with Victoria's name on it. Rosa couldn't read all the complicated words, but she could see the numbers clearly. $5 million. Victoria's signature was at the bottom, but something about it looked strange and shaky, not like Victoria's usual neat handwriting. Rosa's heart was pounding as she looked at the other papers. There were bank documents, business contracts, and letters that made no sense to her. But one thing was clear. All of these papers had Victoria's name on them, and they all seemed to give Charles control over Victoria's money and business. Rosa quickly took pictures of the papers with her phone, trying to keep her hands steady. She had learned to be careful with important documents when she was fighting for custody of Maria years ago. Her lawyer had taught her that pictures could be evidence if something bad happened. Among the papers was a letter that made Rosa's stomach turn. It was addressed to someone called David, and it talked about speeding up the timeline and making sure the accident looks natural. Rosa didn't understand everything, but the words accident and timeline together scared her more than anything she had ever read. There was also a folder labeled Mountain House Plans. Inside were maps of the winding mountain roads leading to the Richardsons' cabin, photos of dangerous curves, and what looked like a schedule. Rosa saw Victoria's name written next to a date just 2 weeks away, the same weekend. Victoria had mentioned wanting to go to their mountain cabin for a romantic getaway. Rosa put the papers back exactly as she found them, but her mind was racing. She remembered all those times Charles had asked about Victoria's schedule, all the strange phone calls, all the times she caught him going through Victoria's things. Now it was starting to make terrible sense. Over the next few days, Rosa watched Charles more carefully than ever. She noticed that he had been putting something in Victoria's morning vitamins. Every day, Victoria took a handful of vitamins with her breakfast, and Charles always prepared them for her, saying it was his way of taking care of her health. Rosa started paying attention to how Victoria felt after taking her vitamins. Victoria had been complaining about feeling tired and having stomach problems lately. She had been to 3 different doctors, but none of them could figure out what was wrong. The doctors said she was probably just stressed from work, but Rosa was beginning to suspect something much worse. When Victoria returned from her business trip, she looked pale and exhausted. She told Rosa that she had felt sick the entire time she was away, but the symptoms got worse when she came home and started taking her vitamins again. Victoria joked that maybe she was allergic to being home, but Rosa didn't find it funny at all. Rosa decided she needed to test her suspicions. She had a cousin named Diego who worked at a medical laboratory downtown. Diego had helped Rosa get Maria tested for allergies a few years ago, and he knew how to test things secretly without asking too many questions. The next morning, Rosa waited until Charles left for work. Then she carefully took one of Victoria's vitamin pills and wrapped it in tissue paper. She told Victoria she needed to run errands during her lunch break and instead drove across town to Diego's lab. Diego was surprised to see Rosa, but when she explained that she was worried about her employer's health, he agreed to help. He said he could test the vitamin for common poisons and harmful substances, but it would take a few days to get results. While waiting for the test results, Rosa continued watching Charles. She noticed that he was making more mysterious phone calls, always stepping outside or going to his car when he needed to talk privately. Rosa also saw him looking at Victoria, with a strange expression sometimes, like he was studying her or waiting for something to happen. The scariest moment came when Rosa was cleaning the kitchen and overheard Charles on the phone in the next room. He was talking about insurance policies and making sure everything is in order. Rosa heard him say something about the cabin. Trip needs to happen soon and she's getting sicker, which is perfect. Rosa felt like she was going to be sick herself. She realized that Charles wasn't just stealing Victoria's money. He was slowly poisoning her and planning to kill her. The mountain cabin trip wasn't going to be a romantic getaway. It was going to be Victoria's last trip anywhere. When Diego called with the test results 3 days later, Rosa's worst fears were confirmed. The vitamin contained arsenic, a deadly poison that could kill someone slowly over time. Diego was shocked and wanted to call the police immediately, but Rosa begged him to wait. She needed more proof, and she needed to figure out how to save Victoria without destroying her own life. Rosa knew that if she went to the police with just one poisoned vitamin, Charles could claim it was a mistake or blame someone else. He was a rich, powerful man with connections everywhere. Rosa was just an undocumented immigrant who cleaned houses. Who would believe her word against his? But Rosa also knew she couldn't let Victoria die. Victoria had been like a guardian angel to Rosa's family, helping them when no one else would. Now Victoria needed someone to save her, and Rosa might be the only person who could do it. Rosa started making a plan. She would gather more evidence, document everything Charles was doing, and find a way to warn Victoria without putting herself in danger. It was risky, but Rosa had survived worse things in her life. She had escaped an abusive marriage, raised a daughter alone, and built a new life in a foreign country. She wasn't going to let a man like Charles Richardson win. The hardest part was acting normal around Charles. Every morning when she watched him prepare Victoria's vitamins, Rosa wanted to scream and knock them out of Victoria's hands. Every time Charles smiled and acted like the perfect husband, Rosa felt sick with anger. But she forced herself to clean and cook and pretend like nothing was wrong, while secretly gathering evidence that might save Victoria's life. Rosa knew she was walking into dangerous territory. Charles Richardson was clearly capable of murder, and if he discovered what Rosa was doing, he might decide that she needed to disappear too. But Rosa had made up her mind. Victoria had protected her family when they needed help. Now it was Rosa's turn to be the protector, no matter what it cost her. Rosa barely slept that night after Diego confirmed the poison in Victoria's vitamins. She lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to save Victoria without getting herself killed in the process. By morning, she had made a decision that terrified and determined her at the same time. She was going to gather enough evidence to destroy Charles Richardson, no matter how dangerous it became. Rosa started by changing her routine slightly. Instead of cleaning Charles's office once a week, she found excuses to go in there every few days. She would volunteer to water his plants, empty his trash more often, or dust his bookshelf extra carefully. Each time, she would quickly photograph any documents she found on his desk or in partially open drawers. The evidence she discovered was worse than she had imagined. Charles had been planning Victoria's death for months, maybe even years. Rosa found emails between Charles and someone named David discussing the inheritance timeline and ensuring the business transfer goes smoothly. They talked about Victoria, like she was already dead, discussing how to divide her company and sell her assets. Most frightening were the detailed plans for the mountain cabin trip. Charles had researched the exact spot where he planned to cause Victoria's car accident. Rosa found photos of a sharp curve in the mountain road, weather reports showing when fog would be thickest, and even notes about which local police officers would respond to an accident in that area. Rosa realized that Charles had been poisoning Victoria slowly to make her weak and confused, so she wouldn't be able to react quickly when he caused the crash. The arsenic was making Victoria sick enough that an accident would seem believable. A tired, ill woman losing control of her car on a dangerous mountain road. But gathering evidence was becoming more dangerous. Charles started noticing that things in his office weren't exactly where he left them. Rosa was careful, but Charles was smart and suspicious. He began asking Rosa strange questions about her cleaning schedule and whether she had been in his office when he wasn't home. One afternoon, Charles cornered Rosa in the kitchen while Victoria was upstairs resting. His friendly mask slipped completely, and Rosa saw the cold, calculating man underneath. "Rosa, I've been thinking," Charles said, stepping closer to her. "Your immigration status is still being reviewed, isn't it? That must be very stressful for you and your daughter." Rosa's hands went cold as she continued wiping down the counter. "Yes, sir. But my lawyer says everything looks good." "Lawyers can be wrong," Charles said quietly. "One phone call from the right person could change everything for your family. You understand what I'm saying, don't you?" Rosa understood perfectly. Charles was threatening to get her deported if she caused any problems. But instead of making her back down, his threat made her more determined than ever. Charles Richardson thought he could scare her into silence, but he had no idea what Rosa had survived in her life. That evening, Rosa called Diego and asked him to meet her at a coffee shop near his lab. She needed someone she could trust, and Diego had always been there for her family. When she told him everything she had discovered, Diego's face went pale. "Rosa, this man is planning murder," Diego whispered. "We have to call the police right now." "With what evidence?" Rosa asked. "Some papers I photographed while cleaning. His house. A poisoned vitamin that I stole. They'll ask how I got these things, and Charles will say I'm a crazy maid trying to cause trouble for his family." Diego shook his head. "But if we don't do something, Victoria's going to die." "I know," Rosa said. "That's why I need your help. Can you test more of Victoria's vitamins? And can you help me record Charles when he's making his phone calls?" Diego looked nervous, but he agreed to help. He gave Rosa a small recording device that looked like a pen and showed her how to use it. He also gave her tiny plastic bags to collect more vitamin samples. Over the next week, Rosa lived in constant fear and determination. She recorded several of Charles's phone conversations, always pretending to dust or vacuum nearby while the device captured his voice. In these recordings, Charles talked openly about the final phase and making sure Victoria takes enough vitamins to be properly weakened before the mountain trip. Rosa also collected more vitamin samples and even managed to record a video of Charles adding white powder to Victoria's pills one morning. She hid in the pantry with her phone, her heart pounding so loud she was sure Charles would hear it. But Charles was becoming more suspicious. He started locking his office door and taking his important papers with him when he left the house. He also began watching Rosa more carefully, sometimes appearing suddenly when she thought she was alone. The worst moment came when Rosa was leaving the house one evening and found Charles waiting by her car. The parking area was dark and isolated, and Rosa realized how vulnerable she was. "Rosa, I want you to know how much Victoria and I appreciate your hard work," Charles said, but his voice was ice cold. "You've become like family to us. That's why I would hate for anything bad to happen to you or your daughter." Rosa forced herself to stay calm. "Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I appreciate this job very much." "I'm sure you do," Charles continued. "And I'm sure you understand that family members keep each other's secrets. They don't ask questions about things that don't concern them. They certainly don't go through private papers or take pictures of things that aren't theirs." Rosa's blood turned to ice. Charles knew what she had been doing. But instead of firing her or calling the police, he was threatening her daughter. Rosa realized that Charles was even more dangerous than she had thought. He wasn't just planning to kill Victoria. He was prepared to hurt anyone who got in his way. "I don't know what you mean, sir," Rosa said quietly. "I just clean the house and mind my own business." Charles smiled, but it was the most frightening smile Rosa had ever seen. "Good, I was sure that's all you were doing. Because if someone was causing problems for my family, I would have to take steps to protect us." And those steps might affect other families too, if you understand what I mean. Rosa drove home with shaking hands, but she didn't stop her investigation. If anything, Charles's threats made her more determined. He had just confirmed that he was a killer, and now he was threatening to hurt Maria too. Rosa couldn't let that happen. The next morning, Rosa made a decision that scared her more than anything she had ever done. She was going to warn Victoria directly about what Charles was planning. It was incredibly risky if Victoria didn't believe her, or if Victoria told Charles what Rosa had said. It could mean death for both of them. But Rosa couldn't watch Victoria take those poisoned vitamins for another day. The mountain cabin trip was scheduled for the following weekend, and Rosa was running out of time. She had enough evidence to prove Charles was poisoning Victoria, but she needed Victoria to believe her before it was too late. As Rosa prepared for what might be the most important conversation of her life, she thought about her grandmother's words about trusting your instincts. Rosa's instincts had been right about Charles from the beginning. Now she had to trust that Victoria's instincts about people were just as good, and that Victoria would recognize the truth when she heard it. The next morning would change everything for both women. One way or another, Rosa arrived at the Richardson house that Friday morning with her heart pounding, and her phone full of evidence that could save Victoria's life or get them both killed. She had practiced what she would say dozens of times, but when she walked into the kitchen and saw Victoria sitting at the breakfast table looking pale and weak, Rosa almost lost her courage. Victoria was pushing her food around on her plate, barely eating anything. The vitamins Charles had prepared were sitting next to her orange juice, waiting to make her even sicker. Rosa watched in horror as Victoria reached for the pills. "Mrs. Richardson, wait," Rosa said quickly. "Please don't take those yet." Victoria looked up in surprise. "Is something wrong, Rosa?" Before Rosa could answer, Charles walked into the kitchen wearing his jogging clothes. He looked at Rosa suspiciously, then smiled at his wife. "Good morning, darling. You look beautiful today. Are you excited about our romantic getaway tomorrow?" Rosa's stomach dropped. She had thought the cabin trip was still a week away, but Charles had moved it up. Victoria was supposed to die tomorrow, and Rosa was running out of time. "I'm looking forward to it," Victoria said weakly, "though I hope I feel better by then. I've been so tired lately." "That's just stress from work," Charles said, kissing Victoria's forehead. "A few days in the mountains will cure everything. Now take your vitamins so you'll have energy for the drive." Rosa watched Victoria reach for the pills again and made a desperate decision. "Mrs. Richardson, I need to talk to you privately." "It's very important." Charles's eyes turned cold. "I'm sure whatever Rosa needs to discuss can wait until after breakfast. And after Victoria takes her vitamins." "No," Rosa said, surprising herself with how firm her voice sounded. "It can't wait. Mrs. Richardson, please don't take those pills. They're making you sick." The kitchen went completely silent. Victoria looked confused, holding the vitamins in her palm. Charles's face went through several expressions before settling on angry concern. "Rosa, you're overstepping your boundaries," Charles said in a warning tone. "Victoria's health is not your concern." But Victoria was looking at Rosa with new attention. "What do you mean they're making me sick?" "These are just vitamins." Rosa took a deep breath and pulled out her phone. "Mrs. Richardson, I have something to show you. Your husband has been poisoning you with arsenic. I had the vitamins tested and I have recordings of him planning to kill you this weekend." Charles moved so fast that Rosa barely saw him coming. He grabbed her phone and threw it across the kitchen, where it shattered against the wall. Then he grabbed Rosa's arm so tightly she gasped in pain. "You're fired," Charles said through gritted teeth. "Get out of my house right now or I'll call the police and have you arrested for theft and harassment." But Victoria had seen enough. The shock and confusion on her face was being replaced by a terrible understanding. Charles let go of her. "Rosa, what recordings? What evidence?" "Victoria, don't listen to her," Charles said, still gripping Rosa's arm. "She's just an angry employee trying to cause trouble. You know how unstable these people can be." Rosa saw red when Charles called her "these people." She had been scared of him for weeks, but now she was furious. She twisted out of his grip and faced Victoria directly. "Mrs. Richardson, your husband has been putting arsenic in your vitamins for months. He has life insurance policies on you worth millions of dollars. He's planned your death to look like a car accident on the mountain road tomorrow. I have proof." Victoria stood up slowly, the vitamins falling from her hand and scattering across the floor. "Charles, is this true?" Charles laughed, but it sounded forced and ugly. Victoria, you're sick and confused. This woman is obviously trying to blackmail us or something. Let me handle this. He reached for Rosa again, but Victoria stepped between them. Don't touch her, Charles. I want to hear what she has to say. I have copies of everything, Rosa said quickly. Insurance papers, emails with someone named David, plans for causing your accident, photos of the exact spot on the mountain road where he was going to kill you. And I have recordings of him talking about poisoning you. Victoria turned to look at her husband, and Rosa saw the exact moment when everything clicked into place for her. Victoria's face went white as she remembered all the times Charles had insisted on preparing her vitamins. All his questions about her business schedule, all the mysterious phone calls. Oh my God, Victoria whispered. How long have you been planning this? Charles realized that his cover was blown, and his mask of loving concern finally slipped completely. The man who emerged was cold, calculating, and terrifying. Since the day I married you, Charles said calmly. Did you really think I loved you? You're a plain, boring woman who got lucky with a computer business. But you're worth more dead than alive, and I got tired of pretending to care about you. Victoria took a step backward, shock and hurt written all over her face. Rosa moved protectively closer to her employer, ready to fight if Charles tried to hurt Victoria. The mountain cabin was perfect, Charles continued, seemingly unable to stop himself from explaining his plan. A tired, sick woman losing control on a dangerous road. The insurance company would pay out without question, and I'd inherit everything. I've been planning this for 3 years. Victoria was shaking now, but her voice was stronger when she spoke. You've been poisoning me for 3 years? Just the last few months, Charles said with a shrug. I needed you weak and confused for the accident to look believable. Although I have to admit, watching you get sicker every day was almost as satisfying as the money will be. Rosa couldn't stay quiet anymore. You're a monster. Mrs. Richardson trusted you, loved you, and you were slowly killing her. Charles laughed again. And you're a nobody who should have minded her own business. Do you really think anyone will believe your word against mine? You're an illegal immigrant who stole private documents and made up lies about a respected businessman. I'm not illegal, Rosa said firmly, and I have evidence that proves everything I've said. Evidence that was destroyed when your phone broke, Charles pointed out. And even if you had copies, you obtained them illegally by going through my private papers. No court would accept them. But Rosa smiled for the first time all morning. I didn't just keep evidence on my phone. I gave copies to my cousin Diego at the medical lab, and I mailed copies to my lawyer yesterday. If anything happens to me or Mrs. Richardson, Diego knows exactly what to do with them. Charles's confident expression faltered slightly. You're bluffing. No, I'm not, Rosa said. And Mrs. Richardson is going to call the police right now, and they're going to arrest you for attempted murder. Charles looked between Rosa and Victoria, and Rosa could see him calculating his options. She realized with growing horror that Charles was deciding whether to run away or kill them both right now to buy himself time. Victoria, call 911, Rosa said urgently. Call them right now. But Charles was already moving toward the kitchen drawer where Victoria kept the knives. Rosa knew they had only seconds before Charles decided that killing them immediately was his best chance of escape. Victoria seemed to understand the danger at the same moment Rosa did. Instead of reaching for the phone, Victoria grabbed the heavy ceramic fruit bowl from the counter and threw it at Charles's head as hard as she could. The bowl caught Charles in the shoulder and knocked him off balance, giving Rosa time to tackle him before he could reach the knives. They crashed to the floor together, and Rosa fought harder than she had ever fought for anything in her life. She was fighting for Victoria's life, for her own life, and for Maria's future. Charles was stronger than Rosa, but he was also surprised by her fierce determination. As they struggled on the kitchen floor, Victoria was screaming into the phone for police and ambulances, begging them to hurry. Rosa managed to knee Charles in the stomach hard enough to wind him, then rolled away and grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the stove. When Charles tried to get up, Rosa hit him across the back with the skillet, and he went down hard. Stay down, Rosa panted, holding the skillet ready to hit him again. The police are coming, and if you move, I'll knock you unconscious. Charles lay on the floor groaning, his perfect life and murderous plan destroyed by a housekeeper who refused to let evil win. Rosa stood over him, shaking but victorious, until she heard the sirens getting closer. The police arrived at the Richardson house within minutes, followed by paramedics and detective cars. Rosa had never been so happy to see flashing lights in her entire life. She was still holding the iron skillet when the officers walked into the kitchen, where Charles lay groaning on the floor and Victoria sat in a chair looking pale but determined. Detective Johnson, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, took control of the scene immediately. She had Rosa put down the skillet and separated everyone while other officers secured Charles and called for additional backup. When Detective Johnson heard Rosa's initial explanation about poison and murder plots, she called for a crime scene team and specialists in financial crimes. Victoria was taken to the hospital immediately to be treated for arsenic poisoning. The doctors were amazed that she was still alive after months of being slowly poisoned. They said if Rosa hadn't intervened when she did, Victoria would have died within days, either from the poison or from the planned car accident. Rosa spent the entire day at the police station, telling her story over and over again to different detectives and prosecutors. She was terrified that they wouldn't believe her. But when Diego arrived with all the evidence she had given him, and when Rosa's lawyer brought the copies she had mailed to his office, the police realized they had an airtight case against Charles. The evidence Rosa had gathered was extraordinary. The recordings captured Charles discussing every detail of his murder plan. The financial documents showed how he had been stealing from Victoria's business accounts for years, while positioning himself to inherit everything. The poisoned vitamins provided physical proof of attempted murder. Most damning of all were Charles's own emails and text messages, which investigators found on his computer and phone. Charles had been so confident in his plan that he had documented everything, including discussions with David, who turned out to be a corrupt insurance agent helping Charles set up the fake accident. Within 48 hours, Charles Richardson was charged with attempted murder, fraud, theft, conspiracy, and a dozen other crimes. David was arrested at his office, and investigators found evidence that the two men had been planning similar schemes against other wealthy victims. The news media picked up the story quickly, and Rosa found herself being called a hero by reporters and strangers alike. The local newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Housekeeper's Courage Saves Employer's Life." Television stations wanted to interview Rosa, and people started calling her the guardian angel maid. Rosa was overwhelmed by all the attention. She had never thought of herself as a hero. She was just a woman who couldn't stand by and watch someone she cared about be murdered. But the praise and recognition meant more to her than she had expected, especially when it came from her own community. Victoria recovered slowly, but completely. The doctors said she would have no permanent damage from the arsenic poisoning, though it would take months for her body to fully heal. During her recovery, Victoria spent a lot of time thinking about how close she had come to death and how Rosa had risked everything to save her. When Victoria was strong enough to leave the hospital, one of the first things she did was visit Rosa at her apartment. Victoria had never been to Rosa's neighborhood before, and seeing Rosa's modest home made her realize how much Rosa had risked by standing up to Charles. "Rosa, I owe you my life," Victoria said, sitting in Rosa's small living room while Maria made coffee for them. "But more than that, I owe you an apology. I had no idea how dangerous my own home had become for you. Charles threatened you and your daughter, and you still chose to save me." Rosa shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Richardson. You helped my family when we needed it most. I couldn't let that man hurt you." "Please call me Victoria," Victoria said with a smile. "And I want to do more than just thank you. I want to make sure you and Maria never have to worry about money or immigration status or anything else ever again." Victoria kept that promise in ways that changed Rosa's life forever. First, she hired the best immigration lawyer in the city to fast-track Rosa's permanent residency application. Within 6 months, Rosa had her green card and was on the path to citizenship. Victoria also insisted on paying for Maria's college education, including all expenses for the 4-year nursing program Maria had dreamed of attending. When Maria graduated, Victoria offered her a job managing the health and wellness program at her company. But the biggest surprise came when Victoria offered Rosa a partnership in a new business venture. Victoria wanted to start a domestic services company that would treat housekeepers, nannies, and other homeworkers with dignity and respect, providing good wages, benefits, and legal protections. "I learned from you that the people who work in our homes are not just employees, they're protectors of our families," Victoria explained. "I want to create a company that recognizes that and treats domestic workers the way they deserve to be treated." Rosa accepted the partnership, and within 2 years their company had grown into one of the most respected domestic services agencies in the state. Rosa used her experience and connections in the immigrant community to recruit workers who needed good jobs and legal support. She made sure every employee received fair wages, health insurance, and help with immigration paperwork when needed. The company became known for something else too: the extensive background checks and safety training Rosa insisted on for all clients. Rosa had learned firsthand how dangerous some employers could be, and she was determined that no worker in her company would ever face what she had faced with Charles. Charles Richardson's trial was a sensation that lasted for months. The prosecutors had so much evidence that Charles eventually pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. David received 25 years for conspiracy and fraud. During the trial, more victims came forward. Investigators discovered that Charles and David had been planning similar schemes against 3 other wealthy women, including one who had died in what police now suspected was murder rather than an accident. Rosa testified at the trial, and her testimony was so compelling that several jurors were seen crying when she described watching Victoria take the poisoned vitamins every morning and feeling helpless to stop it immediately. The judge praised Rosa during the sentencing hearing, saying that her courage had not only saved Victoria's life but had also prevented multiple other murders. The judge called Rosa an example of the best of human nature, someone who risked everything to protect another person simply because it was the right thing to do. 5 years after that terrifying morning in the Richardson kitchen, Rosa and Victoria remained close friends. Victoria had sold her technology company for hundreds of millions of dollars and devoted herself full-time to charitable work and their domestic services business. Rosa had become a leader in her community, advocating for immigrant rights and domestic worker protections. Maria graduated from nursing school at the top of her class and was working at the city's best hospital. She often told people that her mother was her hero, not because Rosa had saved Victoria's life, but because Rosa had taught her that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose courage over fear. Rosa still lived modestly, though she could afford much more now. She preferred to use her success to help other families in situations like hers had been. She funded a scholarship program for children of domestic workers and supported a legal aid clinic that helped immigrants navigate the complex path to citizenship. Sometimes, Rosa would drive past the Richardson house, which Victoria had sold after Charles's arrest. The new owners had no idea of the drama that had unfolded in their kitchen, the life and death struggle that had taken place in their hallway. Rosa would think about how different things could have been if she had chosen to stay silent, if she had decided that protecting herself was more important than protecting Victoria. Charles would have succeeded in his plan, Victoria would be dead, and other innocent women would have followed. Instead, Rosa had chosen courage, and that choice had changed everything, not just for Victoria but for Maria, for the dozens of families Rosa's company now employed, and for Rosa herself. Rosa had learned that heroism wasn't about being fearless. It was about being afraid and choosing to do the right thing anyway. She had discovered that ordinary people like her had the power to stop evil when they refused to look the way. And sometimes on quiet evenings when Rosa was helping Maria study or planning new ways to help families in their community, she would remember her grandmother's words about trusting your instincts. Rosa's instincts had saved 2 lives and changed many others. It had been the most important decision Rosa ever made, and she had never regretted it for a single day.